What's up, guys? How are you doing? I hope everything is fine wherever you are. I'm Pepe Cuenca, and as you guys know, 2 days ago, Shamkir Super Tournament has just started. Gathering the best players in the world. You can find Magnus, Carlsen, you can find Vishy, Topalov, etc, etc. And in round number 2, we had a fantastic encounter between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and Vishy, one of the best players in the world. This is a classic match, right? It's like Barcelona versus Real Madrid in football, right? So it's been a really amazing game. So I welcome you to the game of the day of round number 2 of Shamkir. So let's cut the bullshit and start analyzing what happened in the 64 squares in this fantastic game between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy. It's very interesting from the theoretical point of view. And also, there is a really interesting endgame, so I hope you guys enjoy this game. Alright, so Magnus started with d4 and Vishy replied with knight f6. c4 was played by Magnus and e6 by Vishy, intending to go probably for the Nimzo India after knight c3. You guys know the Nimzo comes after bishop b4, but instead Magnus played knight f3. Here there are different alternatives for black. You can play c5 entering in a Benoni, you can play b6 for the Queen's Indian, bishop b4, the Bogo India, but Vishy decides to go for d4, entering in the Queen's Gambit positions. So here again, two main alternatives for white. White can play g3 entering in the Catalan or knight c3. Magnus decided to go for this knight c3 move, and again here there are different alternatives for black. Vishy decided to go for the most solid approach, bishop e7. You can also play bishop b4, entering in the Ragozin, or you can play c5, for example, and after cd, you can go for the Tarrasch or the semi-Tarrasch. So, a lot of options here. But Vishy played bishop e7, and now two main moves, bishop g5 or bishop f4. Carlsen goes for bishop f4, short castle by Vishy and e3. Pretty natural move, developing now this f1 bishop in order to go for short castle and then to put your king in a safe place, right? Here, I mean, you can play c5 as Vishy played, also knight bd7. It's really interesting, and Vishy himself has played this line against Magnus, I believe. And here, white normally continue with c5, c6, bishop d3, b6, b4, a5, a3, and in these positions white has a lot of space advantage, but black is extremely solid, and this position has been played a lot of times in the top tournaments. But c5 is very trendy nowadays, and here whenever black plays c5, white normally reacts by taking on c5. You don't want to take on d5 really, because after knight takes e5, let's say bishop g3, cd, ed, this is an isolated pawn position where the bishop is on g3. You have wasted 2 tempi putting this bishop on g3 instead of developing this guy on c4 or d3 and going for short castle, and this position is considered to be quite okay for black. So that's why after c5, white normally takes on c5, bishop takes c5, and then we reach this position that has been played a lot of times in top tournaments. And here Magnus played queen c2. The queen is well placed on c2, leaving this square on d1 for the rook to put some pressure on the d5 pawn. And now Vishy played knight c6. And here a3 was played. This is a really natural move, avoiding knight b4 idea. So now in the future you can develop your bishop b3 without being annoyed by this knight on b4, right? And here queen a5. This is heavy theory still. And here, some of you guys could be asking, Pepe, what are you saying? Stupid guy, stupid Spanish guy, why don't white play b4 here? Well, b4 is actually a big blunder, since after bishop takes b4, you can never take back with the pawn, since the rook on a1 is hanging, and there are there's a nasty ping on this diagonal now, and white can basically resign already. So that's why after queen a5, rook d1 was played, and here there are different alternatives. In the last months or even years, black had been playing rook e8, as you guys know. This move is, I mean, there's a lot of theory going on. I'm going to show you the main line. Knight d2, e5, bishop g5, knight d4. White can never take this knight on d4. Queen b1, bishop f5, bishop d3, and this line after bishop takes, knight takes, e4, this line is considered to be okay for black. But in the world match championship between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana, Fabiano came up with this idea, rook d8, which was considered to be like a little bit unusual and not the best move, but it turns out that is extremely interesting, and Vishy goes for the same line. Also, Fabiano Caruana played it against Aronian in the London Chess Classic in 2018 in December, I believe. And here Magnus goes for the same line that as he played against Fabiano Caruana in the World Championship. He played bishop e2. As we saw in the game between Fabiano and Aronian, the black's idea after knight d2 was to play d4. And after knight b3, queen b6, knight a4, looks like black is losing a piece, but Fabiano's idea was to play bishop b4 check, a takes b4, queen takes b4, knight d2, and queen a5. You can take a look on that game between Fabiano and Aronian, but this is extremely complex. Sorry, black is threatening to go knight b4, also threatening to go e5, developing this bishop, and it's extremely complicated. And but as we said, Magnus decided to go for this more solid approach with bishop e2 here. Knight e4 was played by Vishy like in that Caruana's game. And Magnus here varies for the first time. In the World Championship, he played short castle, and in this game, Magnus went for c takes e5. We have to say that black has to take on c3. If black takes on d5, there's this beautiful move. Boom! Rook takes e5, rook takes e5, and queen e4. Sacrificing an exchange for the moment, but it looks like white is doing very, very well in this position. If you go, for example, bishop e6, white goes short castle, now threatening to take on d5. And then if you remove the rook to d8, there's this move knight to g5, threatening almost checkmate, and also taking this guy on e6. Some of you could be saying, Pepe, what happens after rook e8? Nothing happens. Well, you can just take on c5, and after rook takes e4, knight takes e4, and white has 3 pieces and a pawn for the queen, and is much, much better. So that's why after knight c3, Magnus took on c3, e takes e5, and short castle. And then we reach this interesting position where black can't really take on a3. If you take on a3, then there's rook a1 trapping the queen. It's not a good business for black, right? And if you take with the bishop, same story happens. Rook a1, and then no one can stop queen b3 getting this bishop, and then white wins. So that's why Vishy doesn't take on a3, and he plays this useful move h6, which stops knight g5 ideas and also gives some fresh air for the black skin. And here now Magnus says, you know what, I'm gonna play a4. Now there are no more taking on a3 ideas, and it's already a tricky position for black. I mean, you continue with normal moves like bishop e6, developing a piece and protecting d5. There's rook b1, which is extremely annoying, not only threatening the pawn on b7, but also threatening rook b5. Let's say rook d7, rook b5, and black can resign. So that's why after a4, bishop d6 was played by Vishy. Now bishop takes d6 by Magnus, rook takes a6, and c4. Using the fact that black can take since the rook on d6 is hanging. But Vishy says, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to develop my pieces, and if we manage to exchange 2 more pieces and 1 more pawn, then probably this is going to end in a draw. But Magnus, you guys know, is an expert. When he has a tiny edge, he starts using his screwdriver, you know, boom, 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 and annoying his rivals. And he plays c5 here, rook d8, and rook b1. Again, pressure on the b7 pawn. Vishy plays queen c7, and it looks like his position is very, very solid. And Magnus plays queen b2, more pressure on b7. Rook b8 was played, and knight d4. Good move by Magnus Carlsen. Now maybe it's also threatening to go rook fc1. Even knight b5 and knight d6 ideas in the future could be useful. So that's why Anand decided to take on d4. And now it's a really important moment. How do we take? With the queen or with the pawn? Magnus decided to go for queen takes e4. And this is actually extremely interesting, since whenever black plays b6, which he's gonna do it, since now if you don't do it, we're gonna double rooks on the b file, and then it's gonna be a huge pressure on b7, and b6 is gonna be almost impossible to play. When black plays b6, at least white will have this tiny edge due to the isolated pawn. If you take with the pawn, after playing b6, when these two pawns disappear, this position is going to be completely equal. There's no way of putting pressure on the d5 pawn. So that's why Magnus took with the queen on d4, b6, c takes b6, rook takes b6, and then we reach this kind of position where one could say, I mean, there's nothing, right? This is just nothing for white. It's a tiny, tiny edge. But as you're going to see, Magnus starts putting a lot of pressure on Vishy's position. He's really an expert in this kind of positions. He goes for h3, a really humble move, but giving some pressure to the king, no more background problems in the future. And rook c8 was played, fighting for the c file. Now Vishy's idea is to play queen c3 in order to exchange another heavy piece and almost get in an equal position. Rook fd1 was played, queen c3, queen takes e3, rook takes e3, and a5. Magnus forces Vishy-Anand to take on b1, and now Magnus at least has this b file open for his rook, and the plan could be quite simple, to play a6 and rook b7 and start putting pressure on a7. Here Vishy played rook c5, which is not so good. The best move was rook c7, a6 and bishop c8, going for this passive setup, but also stopping white from going rook b7, and looks like black can hold this position. Then in the future you want to bring the king maybe to the center, and then you would have solved all the problems. But instead he played rook c5, a6, and now it was mandatory to go bishop c8 again. Instead, Vishy goes for g6, and then he's trusting in his counterplay on the first and the second rank. Magnus goes for rook b7 here in this position, rook c1 by Vishy-Anand, king h2, and rook c2, attacking this bishop. And now it's there's only one good square for this guy, and it's b5. If you go to f1, you can take on f2, attacking the bishop. If you go to d3, you can keep chasing this bishop by playing, let's say, rook d2, for example, or even rook f2, right? But instead, Magnus played bishop b5. And here, Vishy-Anand decided to go for rook b2, annoying this bishop on b5, but it's almost impossible to take on a7 because the bishop is hanging. But the problem is that after king g3, it's very hard to say a move for black, because you could think that king g7, I'm gonna wait here, I'm gonna bring my king to f6 and nothing will happen. There's a good move here for white in this position. It's a big boom. It's boom, bishop d7 winning on the spot. You can't take on b7, since after a takes b7, this is gonna promote. There's no way of stopping that. If you take on d7, rook takes b2, and if you move the rook away to the a file, then bishop a e6, and then you can see the problems on the 7th rank. Same story happens if you play rook b1. That bishop d7 is coming, and white is almost winning this position. So that's why Vishy-Anand finds a way to eliminate the bishops off the board. He plays bishop c8, rook b8, and now king g7, threatening to go bishop a6 in this position. So that's why Magnus Carlsen takes this bishop, rook takes b5, rook c7, rook e5, and rook a7. And here, as you can see, this kind of endgames where white's a pawn up, but then this pawn is on the a file and the rook is not behind the pawn. Black has a lot of drawing chances, but then there's a big difference in this position. If this pawn were on e6 instead of d5, then this would be a whole different story. But then this pawn is actually a witness. And as you can see, Magnus wins this endgame in a brilliant style. And it shocked me how fast these guys see the winning continuation. Because now Magnus, after king f6, he went for rook e8, rook a3, king h2, h5, and he goes a7. This is a move that you normally want to think like at least for 20 minutes before playing it. Because normally in this kind of endgames, where this pawn is, let's say, is on e6. If you play a7, it's going to be extremely hard for white to make any progress. Because normally the plan is to hide the king on a7 in order to be able to remove the rook and then try to promote the a pawn. But he goes a7 here in this position, and now there's no way of supporting this pawn and moving the rook, since black is gonna check you until he dies. But the thing is, this pawn is a weakness, and it's impossible for black to protect that pawn. This king is gonna take that pawn, and now I'm gonna explain you how. So Vishy played rook a2, h4. You can never take this pawn on f2, right? You can never take Facundo, because this rook moves, and then a8 and white wins. King f5, f3, rook a1, and Magnus plays g3. And here I'm gonna tell you that black can't do anything. Let's try to understand why. You can never bring this king to the e file, since there is rook e8 and then a8 and white wins. You can never play g5, since you just take, and whenever black takes on g5, there is rook g8 check and then a8. And then you can't play f6 and g5 and take with the pawn, since there's gonna be rook f8 check, winning the game on the spot. So basically black can't do anything on the king side, and we're just gonna bring our king and then see what happens. In this position, Vishy resigned, but we are gonna try to explain why. So this could be a line, rook a2. This king can always come, using the first or the second rank, black can stop that. So let's say rook a3, king f2, rook a2, king e1, rook a3, king d2, boom, 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 king f5, king b2, and we have managed to come to b3. Now we have managed to come to b4, and then king c5 is the key, and this pawn is gonna fall. One could say, Pepe, I can always protect this pawn by playing rook a5. You can never play rook a5, because after king b6, you have protected this pawn, and now black hasn't got a check on the b file, and then your next move is gonna be removing the rook and then promoting. So that's why after king c5, black can protect this pawn. You can play king e6 or king e5, since there is a check on e8. But after rook e1, finally we have managed to take this pawn, and guess which pawn is going to be our next victim? The f7 pawn, Facundo. So let's say rook a2, king d6, king f6, e4, rook d2, check, check, and the king comes to e8, the king comes to f8, and finally, boom, e5. Black can't take or play king e6, since there is rook e8, and if king f5, you just take the pawn on f7, and white wins. It's just amazing how Magnus wins these types of positions. It's just fantastic. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I'll be probably uploading game of the day for the next rounds. It's been a pleasure for me to be with all of you guys. I hope you have a nice day. And remember, if you drink, don't drive. See you in the next video. Bye bye.